Hello, friends and listeners. Welcome to Truth, Lies, and Alibis, the true crime podcast from three friends sharing their perspectives from having years of 911 dispatch experience.
Episode 5, The Toolbox Killers. Today, Brittany, Jessica, and I discuss Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris, also known as the Toolbox Killers. We discuss circumstances surrounding their 1970s crime spree. Today, we are going to talk about the Toolbox Killers. I'm going to take this in a little different direction than what we've normally been doing and talk about something that happened not very long ago, but back in the 1970s. So I did have a question that I wanted to ask you guys. It was, when you think of the 1970s, what do you guys think of?
Big hair and big pants.
I was thinking I got self-conscious because everything I was thinking of, I was like, wait, is that the 70s or is that the 60s?
Oh, see, I was like, is that the 70s or is that the 80s?
Like yellow tinted furniture, but I think that's also the 60s.
Or when they covered the furniture in those plastic things.
In the plastic.
Is that the 70s?
Oh, you know what? That's 70s show. We can reference stuff from
yes!
there. So yes, bell bottoms and flowery furniture. Yeah.
That's what I think of too.
So when because, this is a true crime podcast and we all grew up kind of obsessed with it.
Well,
I'm
just along for the ride.
Poor Jess.
I think of serial killers, and I know it's kind of probably weird. I don't know. I grew up, both my parents were cops, and my stepmom did really like that true crime stuff, and I spent a lot of time at the police station. So back then it was, there was a lot of the older cops that were still there, and they'd reminisce and they'd talk about all these things and how crazy policing was back in the day. And I think about...
So you think of Ted Bundy
or Richard Ramirez.
Yeah.
It was a time where, especially in California, that there were a lot of serial killers operating within...
Yeah, it was like prime time
in the
for
same
serial
time.
Killers.
Which is weird, and it's like why then? And is it still prominent now, even though... And maybe, even though it's not reported as much, because, is that really news? Who knows? It's just weird to think about the 1970s and you think of all of these infamous murders and serial killers operating at the same time.
Yeah, that's scary. But I think it's not as common maybe now because of DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Forensics
could be a huge thing. And I kind of tried to look into forensics with the Toolbox Killers, but I think the way that it played out, there wasn't, forensics wasn't a big thing back then, or it was just in the beginning stages, and there wasn't really a whole lot of forensics in this case, as well as 911 calls. I'm going to start. Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris are the Toolbox Killers, or killers. They had 5 victims as far as we know. And they would use household tools, pliers, ice picks, sledgehammers to brutally torture their victims, rape them, and then they often killed them by strangulation with a wire hanger. It's pretty gruesome. Roy Norris and Lawrence Bittaker met in 1977 while serving time at the California Men's Colony Prison in San Luis Obispo. Norris held a record of rape and was discharged from the Navy after an attempted rape. Norris was diagnosed with severe schizoid personality and was later committed to a state hospital in California as a mentally disordered sex offender. He was released after 5 years when doctors declared that he was no longer a threat to society. Bittaker had an IQ of 138, which is very high, as well as a long rap sheet, mostly theft and transporting stolen goods. During one of Bittaker's times in prison, he was evaluated by a psychiatrist and diagnosed with as a borderline psychopath. He ended up in San Luis Obispo after stabbing a store clerk who attempted to stop him from stealing. Norris and Bittaker bonded during their time in San Luis Obispo, and they had similar sadistic fantasies, which ultimately developed into their plan of rape, torture, and killing young women. Both were released to parole within a year of each other, and they seemed like they were model parolees. Bittaker worked a steady job. His job as a machinist in an aircraft industry, and Norris worked as an electrician with pretty decent pay. So to their like parole officers, they were leading what seemed to be a normal life. On the outside, they were doing well, but on the inside, they still had this plan. So while they were together in prison, they had made this plan to purchase a van, and they named it Murder Mac. When they were both out,
Lovely.
they did purchase, they purchased a 1977 GMC cargo van and nicknamed it Murder Mac.
Not the mystery
this was
machine.
No.
Very different.
No. Very different. They wanted to have a place where they could commit these crimes, but it was immobile. So that's why they got this van. They began patrolling the area between Redondo Beach and Santa Monica and along the Pacific Coast Highway. And at first they started just taking pictures of girls that they would pick up that were hitchhiking. And they would just take their pictures. Then they began to perfect their technique and started scouting out secluded locations to carry out their plan. The men targeted young women between the ages of 13 and 16 years old. And eventually their actions started to escalate from picking up girls and taking pictures to raping and beating their victims with the tools in their van. Then that escalated eventually to turning into the 5 murders that we know of today. The first victim was 16-year-old Lucinda or Cindy Lynn Shafer. She was taken on June of 1979. Lucinda was forced into the van. I will give a little warning. The descriptions of the murders are pretty graphic, and I have watered them down a lot. The first victim, 16-year-old Lucinda Lynn Shafer, or Cindy, was taken in June of 1979. She was forced into the van. Her mouth was duct taped and hands and wrists tied. After torturing and raping Cindy, Norris attempted to strangle her, but he stated that he saw a certain look in her eyes and he had to exit the van and throw up, and he could not commit the murder. This was after he was taken into custody. He also later claimed that it was Bittaker's idea to murder her and not his. Bittaker ended up completing the murder by using a wire hanger to strangle Cindy. They took her body to the San Gabriel Mountains, where they disposed of her body over some steep cliffs into this canyon, and that's where they would take the next 3 victims to dispose of their bodies. That was their spot. The second victim was taken the following month in July of 1979. It was 18-year-old Andrea Joy Hall, who was abducted and raped. Lawrence and Norris's sadistic needs escalated during this murder. That's when they took turns encouraging her to scream prior to killing her. And that's when they began audio recording the murders. So they would record them on tapes. 15-year-old Jackie Doris Gilliam and 13-year-old Jacqueline Leah Lamp were abducted together on September 3rd of 1979. The girls were held captive for 2 days by Lawrence and Norris. They were raped and tortured for a long period of time, and they were also recorded before they decided to strangle them.
2 days is such a long time.
It is. It's hard to
It's sad.
hear about. In between the murders of Jackie and Leah and the last victim, Lawrence and Norris attempted to kidnap Shirley Sanders, or in some other research that I've done, they name her Robin Robeck. She was the only girl to not be taken from the Pacific Coast Highway in hitchhiking, and the only girl to really have survived an encounter of the two during this time that we know of. She was taken on September 30th. She was raped, but she managed to escape and report the assault. Unfortunately, she could not remember the vehicle's license plate number or identify her attackers at that time.
That's a bummer.
Yeah. On October 30th, the last victim was abducted, Shirley Bedford. Lawrence and Norris's actions again escalated. Their sadistic needs escalated. And this time, instead of going to the normal spot in the national park, they decided to rape and torture this victim while driving throughout the city. I believe that Norris was driving and Bittaker did this. They recorded this one, and this murder was the tape that was actually found by law enforcement.
Don't they play that tape in court too?
They do.
Yeah.
So this time, this murder, they kind of changed their MO. They discarded Shirley's body in a lawn in Hermosa Beach rather than taking it to the national forest and discarding her into the canyon. And that's when people started putting things together that girls who were hitchhiking in certain ages were going missing. And they began to call the duo the Toolbox Killer because they believed that there was only one killer at the time. In October, Norris bragged about the killings that he and Bittaker committed to a friend. That friend realized that Norris took a liking to his 13-year-old daughter at the time, an unhealthy liking to her. So he decided to report this to law enforcement and to his lawyer. After LAPD received this information, they began investigating Norris and following him. Norris was taken into custody by law enforcement for marijuana possession and parole violation when he was spotted dealing. When they went through his home, I believe they found over 500 Polaroid pictures of young women and some other evidence or potential victims. After a lengthy interrogation, Norris confessed to being involved in the murders, but stated he was an accomplice and was high on drugs when the murders happened. Norris took a plea bargain and placed the blame on Bittaker. Norris also assisted law enforcement in locating the bodies of Jackie Gilliam and Leah Lamp, the two girls that were murdered at the same time and held captive for 2 days. Bittaker was arrested on the rape of Shirley Sanders, or Robin Robick. She was able to pick him and Norris out of a photo lineup after law enforcement suspected they were involved in her case. In a documentary released in 2001 on Oxygen, Bittaker stated when he learned of Norris's arrest, he took their van and cleaned it out and also hid or disposed of the tape recordings that they took of their rapes and murders. Bittaker forgot one tape that was later found by law enforcement in the tape player of the van, and that tape was the murder of Shirley Bedford. There's many people out there that I've read through research that try to get their hands on this tape or listen to this tape. This tape will not be played, and it is not available to the public. The recording was reported to be so horrific that when played in court during the trial, many people walked out and would not return. I learned that this tape is used by the FBI Academy as a training tool for agents to better understand sadistic behaviors and the people, like what their behaviors can escalate to. After Bittaker was taken into custody, both men blamed each other for the killings. After a long trial, Norris was sentenced to 45 years in prison, and he died in prison in February of 2020 at the age of 72, I believe of a heart attack. He was at a California medical facility. Lawrence Bittaker was sentenced to death and applied for parole in 2009 and 2019 prior to his death. He died rather recently, but not after making a relationship with a forensic psychologist who is in the documentary that Oxygen put out. And she, with her rapport that she built with Bittaker, and it could be seen as very strange, she assisted in finding another body that Bittaker talked about. So Bittaker was interviewed over the course of 5 years by Laura Brand. Through her study of sadistic serial killers, Laura built a relationship with Bittaker. She believed he was one of the most sadistic serial killers in American history. And in that documentary, Bittaker stated, "I have never had any sadistic behaviors," but he has ultimately gone down in many textbooks as one of the most sadistic or the most sadistic serial killer that we've had. That documentary is on Hulu Plus, and it's The Toolbox Killer. If you're interested, if anybody's interested, I would suggest watching it, but just know that it's very difficult to watch, and everything that I've talked about, I've watered down because I didn't really want to get into that on this podcast because it's pretty rough. Those are the Toolbox Killers, and I kind of wanted to bring it up because these guys from the outside and to people, they were being monitored. They were on parole, which is the federal probation, right? And on the outside, they seemed like they were doing well, and there was no suspicion that they had these sadistic fantasies of what they wanted to do. And it just seemed like, while that was 1970s and more technology and policy and laws have come into place that help hold offenders accountable, it was one of those ones where it was just, I don't know, it was just kind of mind-boggling that they were able to do all of this under supervision.
Yeah.
And that's also when 911 was different and dispatching was different. It's kind of like a young age in a weird age of law enforcement, that even if these people had called 911, if they didn't know their exact location, I don't think anybody ever would have found them. They would just have a 911 recording or a 911 copy of a transcript of what was said. And it kind of intrigued me. They were also diagnosed with all of these mental health disorders, and I know back then mental health wasn't like it is today, and even today we are still learning and growing in it, but how not addressing that or providing structure to that kind of disorder, how bad it can probably go. I don't know, it was just an interesting case.
I think it's interesting because it's not very well known, like a lot of other cases are. You know, I didn't know about it until Kylee brought it up, and then I watched the documentary because Kylie's like, you have to watch it, it's really interesting. And I agree, you should totally go watch it if you can stand to hear some of that stuff. But the relationship of, what was her name, Laura?
Yeah, Laura Brand.
Yeah. The relationship she like established with, it was Bittaker, right? That she, it's so weird. It's just, I understand her wanting to help find more victims. I understand her wanting to get to know why he is the way he is, I guess. But I don't understand why she let the relationship get because it became kind of personal eventually.
Yeah.
And like she was pregnant and he knew about it, and I think she called, like, didn't her son, or was it a girl or a boy, I don't remember, but like call him uncle something or other, or
Yeah, she like invited him into her life, and I find that strange too, but I almost wonder,
it's so weird,
if she did that because while he is has these sadistic behaviors and is 100% like a psychopath, it also seems like, again, here we are talking about a narcissistic personality, and I don't know if narcissist is the right term.
I think he's a sexual sadist, and
yeah,
he's a psychopath.
But he like, so in both Roy Norris and Lawrence Bittaker, if you like read into them a little bit, both of them had a very traumatic childhood, abandonment issues. They had major issues with older women, even well into their adult life, just due to what happened with their mothers. Both were sexually assaulted. And I think that for him, he held in like high regard that relationship with her and like felt superior. Does that make sense? Like it almost seemed like he had to feel this way in order for her to get that information. And while I don't think that I would say, yeah, I'm pregnant and you can be my child's uncle, but I do understand, like I do kind of see how she played his game almost. Does that make sense?
She manipulated the manipulator.
Yeah.
By seeing what he wanted, she was able to play into that. And as opposed to being a victim of his game, like you said, she's playing him at his own game.
Which I kind of got in the documentary a little bit, but I also, like, she was sad when he passed away.
Yeah.
It just was a little bit weird. It's like, you know, she's talking to this person all the time and she is trying to play this game, but I also feel like in a way he kind of won her over.
Some sort of attachment
Yeah,
made.
and it was just a little bit creepy for me. It just, because you can see them interacting and it's so weird. It's just weird.
I think there's two sides of it, right? Where you have Bittaker that's having some level of needs fulfilled by this relationship with her, and he's getting off on the fact that he thinks he's manipulating her and he's getting this information. He's worming her way into her life and getting her to involve him in all this. And then on the flip side of it, she's getting off on him falling victim to her.
Yeah.
Because she's able to get more information. They're able to discover another victim. So in that fulfillment of needs, they've formed an attachment. And it's not what either of them went into this quote-unquote relationship expecting, but inevitably that's what happened.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sorry, did you say who the victim was that she helped find? I don't remember.
I don't remember what it is. I want to say it was the very first victim. And I didn't say this earlier, but she was the one where, so the very first victim, I believe they strangled with the wire hanger. So it might have been her or one of the second victim. And I think she was the one who was killed. He put an ice pick through her ear is what I remember. So it was one of those ones. And I can't remember which one it was. I know in the documentary, I remember Laura, having a conversation with Bittaker, and it was right before he passed. He had a cardiac issue, like maybe a heart attack or something, and they play a clip of him talking, saying he didn't like it. He felt vulnerable, and he goes, I imagine that's probably what my victims would have felt like. And I just remember hearing that and being like, as much as I, as a person, would want to be like, oh, he's remorseful, I just think that he enjoyed feeling and reliving a victim's moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it freaked me out because he felt comfortable saying this to this forensic psychologist. And I do agree that the relationship was a little strange, and it's weird, right? If you think back on your dispatching days, you had those frequent flyers, but when they pass away, you have this weird...
Some of them are nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of have this, like, you're kind of sad, right? Like, you're like, oh, well, I'm never gonna talk to them again. And I do agree with you, Brittany. Like, I think that she was truly upset that Lawrence had passed away. But sometimes I wonder if it was just like that moment of, oh, well, is she sad that he passed, or is she sad that she can't find out more? Mm-hmm. Or I don't think that they found all of the bodies, and I truly don't think that it's just limited to the 5 girls.
No.
There is a lot.
That's what I was going to ask, is if they had any idea of if there was more victims.
So the thing with this, too, is also, like, it's crazy how these 2 people found each other.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like
Yeah.
the Ken and Barbie killers,
Mm-hmm.
how they found each other. It's crazy.
Penitentiaries, especially in the previous decades in which mental health wasn't as investigated as it is now. Mm-hmm. Like, it wasn't considered like a big piece of motive and a lot of that stuff.
They didn't really take it seriously.
Yeah, so it was just people were sick, sick as in not, but like crazy sick. Mm-hmm. And that was it. Like, that's just how they are. There was no why to it. So they were just, penitentiaries, detention centers. They were all in the same space. So it did allow a lot of those codependent, escalating kind of behaviors to mingle and meet.
Yeah.
And form the relationships in which you have Bittaker, someone who's highly intelligent and has these needs, who meets somebody like Norris.
Well, he can manipulate him.
Yes, exactly. They have those same sort of fantasies in which they both get off on the idea of torturing women, or they like having the power over it, and then those ideals morph and change, and Bittaker is able to manipulate him and get him to play along, and then he's enjoying that. And
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. Like Brittany said, it's crazy how they met, and had the 2 not met at all,
I think Bittaker still would have ended up doing bad things, but I don't know if Norris would have ended up doing things to that level, maybe.
to that level, I could definitely foresee sexual assault, or just assault, But
Yeah.
the escalation and the torturing of it, who knows if Bittaker wasn't there to influence, if he actually would have gone as far.
But then again, like, I know he was manipulated. I think he was manipulated into doing these kinds of things, but he also went along with it. Like, they had this plan, right?
No, it doesn't make him innocent by any means.
I'm just like, they bought this van. They made these plans. Like, he continued to go with him, knowing he says he got sick, couldn't go through with it, and he threw up, but then he went back. If that's true, part of him was still got him off, right? Because that's why they do these things.
during the trial, and this is stuff that I didn't cover. Like, everybody's welcome to go and search this for themselves or watch the documentary. But during the trial, in the very beginning, both of them go back and forth about, he was the mastermind, or this was his idea. So both of them cannot. And through the entire trial, you'll see that Bittaker, he will not take responsibility for it. And he will change it so that it was consensual. And he paid them to do this. And that these women wanted this.
I strangled her to death consensually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That it was, there will never be any responsibility taken by Bittaker.
Oh,
or
no,
Norris.
they never will take responsibility for what none of them ever do,
No.
Was Norris the one who confessed to a friend, or was it Bittaker?
It was Norris. Norris confessed to a friend.
Okay.
And told him about all these murders that he committed. And then I think the friend had read something or saw something that matched everything that Norris had told him. And that friend also had a 13-year-old daughter that Norris was
Why would you be bringing a sex offender around your kid?
Right. But also, who knows what the sex offender laws were back in 1977.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know what they are. I know that they're different now. But it's also crazy to think that both of these men were on parole. It's not probation.
Yeah.
Aren't they not
Parole.
supposed to be hanging out with people who are also on parole, or no?
Again, I don't know what the rules or the terms of their parole were back then, but I know things are very different now. But even now, an offender can be watched. The thing is that anybody can be very, very smart. And when they want to get away with something,
There's nothing that'll stop them.
they will find creative ways to get away with something. People are people. People are human. And not everybody is going to catch somebody doing the bad things. Right? Until it's unfortunately too late.
Yeah.
But there was that aspect of this where I was like, man, they were on parole, and I'm assuming that they did check-ins and they were monitored. So it's crazy to think that Norris had, I'm pretty sure what I read was like over 500 pictures of young women that they had taken of as they were driving around, and potential victims just hanging out in their house.
I also remember documentary, they had that neighbor of his, right? That wasn't she like a pregnant girl who he like showed her pictures of these girls? Because I know he showed one of his girl neighbors pictures and was like kind of bragging about how the girls that he had been with won't talk anymore, or he said something like that to her. I remember that. And so it was like they both were bragging. Thank God Norris's friend said something, because who knows how many more people they would have killed. Or
well, and their behavior was escalating so much. It went from like, just taking pictures, and now they're raping, and now they're raping and murdering, and now they're hiding, like they found a secluded spot.
Audio recording.
Yeah. They're audio recording, and now they're doing it in the van while they're driving around. So this person is getting brutally tortured.
It's just gonna get worse and worse and worse too from there. And like, how much worse can you get? Because it's already pretty fucking bad.
Yeah. So it was just, their actions were escalating, and their like MO, it would be like a month and a half where they would not, like they would go take pictures and they wouldn't do anything, and then they would hit again. And it was like pretty much like every month or so that they were doing a new murder. But I feel like it was escalating too. Like it was getting to a point where they weren't going to wait a month anymore. They were going to be doing it in like every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, and it was crazy to think while this is happening, and the Oxygen documentary covers this too, like while this is happening, you have multiple other serial killers operating in the same area during the same time frame while they're operating. So there those infamous cases. I'm not going to name them because I don't know them off the top of my head right now, but I'm pretty sure one was like,
there's so many to choose from.
BTK. And,
I feel like.
yeah, there was all these others. And it was kind of like, what was in the water in 1970s, right? Like, why?
For real, right?
Was it because we didn't really have mental health, and so now we have investigated mental health a little bit more, and like people are being treated? Is it really like a mental health issue, or was this just the way that they were born? Or like, there's so many questions, right? Like there's so many questions as to why.
I think it has a lot to do with their upbringing too. Like,
yeah,
I don't remember if it was Norris or Bittaker, but one of them, their dad would come around every so often, and he would bring them BDSM magazines, not just like, Playboy or something, but hardcore BDSM magazines that he had. And he was like 10. So like, he's being exposed to all this stuff at a young age. Like, there's no excuse. There's 100% no excuse, but it's also like, what if he had had different parents?
Well, it's what comes up in your formative years,
Yeah.
when you're still developing, and how that shapes how your early relationships shape your latter relationships. And being given these magazines and having kind of being shown that women are things and can be manipulated, and
they're objects. Like,
they're objects to play with.
Yeah.
Obviously fed into his feelings about women later. There were things for him to collect and then to play with. Also, please don't hitchhike alone, regardless of what decade it is.
That's another thing that was common back then. So maybe that also kind of played into it, because there was more
opportunity.
Yes, there was more opportunity. Maybe not. Like, I like you said, people are going to find a way to do things they want to do if they have these kind of tendencies. Anyway, and I'm not blaming the victim at all, but I'm just saying, don't, like Jess said, don't hitchhike, please.
But then you had the two girls that were hitchhiking, and they were picked up together. So it's just kind of like,
well, yeah, but there's these two grown men picking up these teenage girls.
Yeah, like when you're a teen,
they didn't have a chance.
No, I'm just saying that when you're younger, like, you might want that freedom and you want to like get away from my parents or whatever. But just because this happened in 1977 doesn't mean that it can't happen in 2022. Like, there are some sick people out there that we don't even know about. I mean, I don't remember the statistic, but there, at any given time, there are like multiple serial killers that are operating just within the United States that haven't been caught yet. So, I mean,
what is that statistic about psychopaths too? It's like 1 out of every 3 people is a psychopath.
Oh, that's bad for this podcast.
I was gonna say, which one of us is a psychopath?
I gotta go. Not me. Like, just getting out of the situation.
So she says.
Okay. So So be aware of your surroundings and be smart about it. And like, yeah, you living it with your parents, 18 seems like a far long way. It's not. It's not. So just learn from your parents, be smart.
You know what you could do as a parent? You could do what I do and give your child a healthy dose of scaring by listening to murder
crime
podcasts all the time. Because the Novalee is like, oh, that person's a weirdo, Mom. Stay away from them. She's like, there are psychos everywhere who could kidnap you. And I'm like, this might not be healthy, but at least I'm keeping you safe.
Well, the sad thing is the threat doesn't stop at any particular age.
No.
And no matter the fact that I can bring to light that we are in 2022 and I still feel a level of fear going somewhere alone, especially at night. That threat is still there.
Especially as a woman.
That's my point. I don't have any other experience to go off of.
I mean, I know men get scared too, but especially as a woman.
My own experience. Getting scared at night walking alone because I do know that there's a threat. And everybody around me may be a very nice human, but I don't know that. And so...
Or they could not be.
Brittany?
Ask Novalee.
Well, and there's the other level, or not level, but there's this other part of 2022. Now that we have technology, you don't just have the physical threat, you have the threat over the internet. So, like,
oh God, that's terrifying.
You have sexual predators that operate on the internet. That's the thing. Like, you post a picture on the internet, you can click on that picture and find the details of where it was taken and what time it was taken. And it is really scary how easily it is to access people's information just by like a social media post. And I think that's why, like, when my brother had his daughter, I was so distraught that he was posting picture after picture after picture, like every day picture of her. There are people out there that would be like, hey, that's a cute kid, and that's a grown-ass man, right? Or woman, whatever. But and then we have our eyes have been opened to sexual trafficking and trafficking of young kids, and that world exists, and it's unfortunate. It sucks. Like, there's people out there that try to stop it.
It happens a lot more than you know of too.
Yeah, so it's like 1977, it was, young people who were hitchhiking, and a lot of serial killers picked up hitchhikers and murdered them. But it's grown into the internet. So the internet's just as much of as a door to all of this than hitchhiking, right?
I think it's important to rely on those instincts, right? Like, at the end of the day, you're like, when you're walking along and you get goosebumps. I'm not always saying that 100% of the time there's something there, but that's your body feeling something. So pay attention to it.
Yeah.
Like, listen to your bodily instincts. Like, your hair on your arms might stand up, and it's because somebody across the store from you keeps watching, and you keep seeing this person at the end of each aisle, or whatever the circumstances. Be vigilant to that and pay attention to that, and don't just push it aside. I'm not saying go home and barricade yourself and become a shut-in. I mean, that's my choice to do that.
I wish I could do that.
But no. But in the very least, pay attention to that. Listen to those instincts and take care of yourself.
And don't hitchhike.
Just be aware of your surroundings.
Yeah.
And, like, understand that, you know what I mean? Like, if it feels, like you said, if it feels weird, listen to your gut, and then be aware of the people you're around. And just when you go somewhere, like, have an exit plan. Like,
always.
You walk into a building and you know that there's more than one exit, or, where's the security guard at? And can I trust the security guard? Or can I go to the clerk? Or, you know what I mean? Like, just being aware of the situations, because I'm not saying that these victims could have, a lot of the times the men would stop and they would just walk. There's one victim that the girl was just walking by. I think that was the one that got away. She was just walking by and they just grabbed her. In the documentary, there was one where they grabbed her in front of a tennis court and people saw.
Oh yeah.
But they, like, calmed it down and then they left. So don't walk next to a van. Don't walk next to that car if you don't have to. This case was just, I think it brought to light so many questions about so many different topics that I thought it was interesting. And it's also one that Laura said, the forensic psychologist said that she read it in her criminal justice textbook about these guys. Well, I got my degree in criminology and I never read about these guys. I had never heard of the Toolbox Killer.
I hadn't either.
Or killers. even in watching like all of these true crime documentaries, I had never really heard about them. So it was different.
Well, I think the only one they have about them is that Hulu one, right? I mean, that's probably 80% of what I watch is true crime, and I had never heard of them.
I think in a lot of like shows that they're referenced but not referenced. Does that make sense? Like they make characters that are based off of them. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I've ever seen anything where that somebody says, yes, Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris are the Toolbox Killers.
I feel like there'd be a lot to learn going into that, because delving into that relationship between the two mentally ill figures, like when you have a relationship like that where they feed off of each other, and then the needs start to escalate because they're fulfilling those. It's like an addict, like you fulfill that need and then the itch gets stronger, so the next time you itch it doesn't feel the same way, so you go to the next step and then that feels good, but then the next time you want something stronger. Yeah. Mental health is such a big portion of it. We are all just chemicals and nerves, and something gets off balanced and somebody's whole thought process changes, right? Like us three sitting here, their rationalization of what they've done and why they do that is so otherworldly.
Yeah.
Like that it doesn't make any sense to us, and like, how could you do something so terrible? But to them, that's their normal thinking. There was no problem with it. They even met somebody else that agreed with them, So
yeah, that's the scary part, is like, it's just not just one person who's like, oh no, this is totally normal. They were like, oh yeah, this is great. I feel the same exact way. Let's do it. Which means there's even more people out there who probably also would agree with them.
Well, then it's hard too, because you look at this and it in a sense, not much has changed in the fact, like with mental health, is it the system doesn't really deal with them deal with anybody with a mental health disorder or like any like depression or anxiety. They just stick them in jail. Like they're held accountable, but they're just put in jail. So there's not really a lot of other thinking on how to help the population that struggles with severe mental illnesses.
Yeah.
Like they don't,
Yeah, and I think in law enforcement in general too, it's kind of like a joke, like mental health is, which is kind of sad. And maybe that's like they don't understand it. Yeah. And I'm not saying like just law enforcement, I'm just maybe the whole criminal justice system in a way too. It's just something that
there's a weakness to it.
Yeah, and that needs more attention, I feel like.
Yeah, well, it's only recently that the stigma around suicidal ideations and suicidal thoughts has started to wane. Mm-hmm. For so long, it wasn't, you need help. It was, well, get stronger, get over it.
Yeah.
That's not going to fix anything, because it isn't just a way of thinking. It's an imbalance. It's a legitimate imbalance within your body that you can't just turn off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's just sad. It's like, I'm not saying that these people deserved anything more than what they got, because I don't think they do, because of everything that they did. I do think mental health played a big role in what they did, like you said.
I feel like there's so much room for growth, right? There's so much room for growth, not just in law enforcement, but in the criminal justice system and in a lot of places, like even in the mental health world, to better themselves and better help those who really need it. Because it's hard, I think, for there's like lacking resources out there, especially for law enforcement, to better assist with mental illness.
Yeah, they're not always given the proper tools to be able to handle something like that.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Additional information for each case can be found on our website, truthliesandalibis.buzzsprout.com. New episodes will be uploaded every Monday. Find us on Instagram and Facebook at Truth, Lies, and Alibis.